Good day, everyone. This is Mark Vello, and you're listening to Headline News. President Trump sanctions 14 Chinese lawmakers. Who's next? President Donald Trump signed Executive Order 13936 to hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable for threatening Hong Kong's autonomy, violating their human rights. This resulted in the U.S. Department of the Treasury imposing sanctions against all 14 vice chairs of the 13th National People's Congress Standing Committee, NPCSC, on December the 7th. These 14 individuals are Wang Chen, Cao Jianming, Zhang Chunxian, Shen Yueyue, Ji Bingshuan, Arkan Imirbaki, Wan Exiang, Chen Zhu, Wang Dongming, Padma Chouling, Ding Zhongli, Hao Mingjin, Cai Dafeng, and Wu Weihua. So far, these sanctions are the hardest hit that the Chinese officials have taken since the Trump administration launched a trade war on Beijing. Compared to previous sanctions, this targeted the most number of officials among the highest echelon in office. On December 7th, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo issued a press statement. He explained that the 14 vice chairs of the NPCSC were held accountable in connection with developing, adopting, or implementing the law of the People's Republic of China on safeguarding national security in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. This law undermined the autonomy of Hong Kong. Beijing's unrelenting assault against Hong Kong's democratic processes has gutted its legislative council, rendering the body a rubber stamp devoid of meaningful opposition. Pompeo emphasized that our actions today underscore that the United States will continue to work with our allies and partners to hold Beijing accountable for undermining Hong Kong's promised autonomy. The United States again urges Beijing to abide by its international commitments and to heed the voices of many countries which have condemned its actions. The U.S. Department of the Treasury's website lists the names of the 14 vice chairs of the NPCSC. These individuals are under financial sanctions. These sanctions freeze any assets they hold in the U.S. and block any American person from interacting with these individuals and their assets. On December 6, Bloomberg reported that the Trump administration also has plans to add Chinese Vice Premier Han Zheng and NPCSC Chairman Li Jianshu to the sanctions list. Currently, they are not on the list of officials under sanctions. Bloomberg News reported before that President Trump's team had already drawn up a list of senior officials, which included Han Zheng and Li Jianshu. Pompeo called the NPCSC a rubber stamp because this institution was created by the Chinese Communist Party to legitimize its existence. The NPCSC passed Hong Kong national security law on June 30th against the will of Hong Kong residents. The law undermined Hong Kong's autonomy because it authorized the Hong Kong government to suppress dissidents and pursue policies that violate its constitutional principle of one country, two systems. It took away Hong Kong residents' right to freedom. Therefore, these sanctions were also a retaliation on the Chinese Communist Party's disqualification of 4 Hong Kong pan-democratic legislators. On December 7th, China's Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Hua Chunying appeared at a press conference in response to the sanctions and threatened the U.S. not to interfere with Chinese politics. U.S. House of Representatives passes bill to protect Hong Kong people. The Hong Kong People's Freedom and Choice Act, which has been delayed for more than 2 months, was passed by the U.S. House of Representatives on Monday. Once the bill is passed by both houses of Congress, it will be sent to the White House, where the President will sign it into law. According to the Voice of America, H.R. 8428, The Hong Kong People's Freedom and Choice Act was introduced in June of this year by Democratic Rep. Tom Malinowski and Republican Rep. Adam Kinzinger. Under this bill, the U.S. government would provide temporary protected status to Hong Kong residents currently in the U.S. on visas who fear political persecution if they return to Hong Kong, and would also expedite the processing of refugee applications from Hong Kong residents and exclude this category of applications from the overall annual U.S. refugee admissions limit. The bill also requires the U.S. government to differentiate Hong Kong people from those of mainland China in its immigration policy, and it encourages like-minded allies to provide asylum to Hong Kongers oppressed by Beijing. After Beijing imposed the national security law in Hong Kong, the situation for the Democrats has become increasingly precarious. In the last week, Beijing accelerated its revenge campaign, forcing Hong Kong legislator Ted Hui Chi-fang, a pan-Democrat, into exile overseas. The authorities immediately did to him what the Chinese Communist Party typically does to dissidents, temporarily freezing his and his family's private bank accounts. In this week alone, former members of the now disbanded Democisto political party, Wang Qifeng, Lam Long Yen, and Chao Ting, were sentenced from 7 to 13.5 months in prison for inciting others to participate in an illegal assembly. The founder of Next Media, a Hong Kong media company, Lai Ching-ying, was charged with fraud and denied bail, and in June, just before the national security law took effect, founding chairman of Democisto, La Kun-chung, was forced into exile abroad. Historic moment. European version of the Magnitsky Act adopted. December 10th is Human Rights Day. European Union adopted the Global Human Rights Sanctions regime on December 7th, which will target those that violate human rights around the world with sanctions. The bill is also described as the European version of the Magnitsky Act. In response, Josep Borrell, the European Union Minister for Foreign Affairs, said that this is a landmark agreement. The Council of the European Union announced that the 27 EU foreign ministries have formally adopted a bill establishing a global human rights sanctions regime to sanction human rights violators, which will target individuals and institutions, as well as countries for human rights violations. It has global scope and has an emphasis on the promotion of human rights guarantees, which is a priority and a basis for EU foreign policy. It also reflects the EU's determination to defend human rights. The case has been called the European version of the Magnitsky Act. As reported on the EU website, the framework for targeted restrictive measures applies to acts such as genocide, crimes against humanity, and other serious human rights violations or abuses, such as torture, slavery, extrajudicial killings, arbitrary arrests or detentions, and so on. Such restrictive measures will provide for a travel ban applying to individuals and the freezing of funds applying to both individuals and entities. In addition, persons and entities in the EU will be forbidden from making funds available to those listed either directly or indirectly. There have been reports that the European version of the Magnitsky Act will come into force on December 10th, coinciding with International Human Rights Day. EU has already said last week that the first sanctions list is expected to be implemented by the end of the first quarter of 2021 and will be valid for 3 years, after which it will need to be further extended. Council of the European Union will establish, review, and amend the sanctions list on the basis of proposals from member states or the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. European Union's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Mr. Borrell, said it took a year to arrive at a law that could help address the issue of human rights persecution around the world, which is a landmark agreement. This concludes today's headlines. Thank you for your time, and stay tuned for the next headline news.